My name is Iris, and I'm currently a mom to Hannah and a wife to Daniel, and we have a baby along the way. I'm also a operating room nurse, and I love just seeing all the gnarly surgeries at work every day.
My name's Sam. For those of you that care, I'm a type 8 on the Enneagram. I'm an ENTJ, passionate about winning. Currently, I am married to a lovely wife, and I am also an entrepreneur with a boba shop called Boba Shark.
My name is Frances. I'm a creative multi-hyphenate entrepreneur. I am newly married, and I am passionate about traveling, my dog Willow, and pruning my rose bushes right now.
Hey, this is Sam. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about church and relationships. We're just going to kind of go over when people think they're ready to date, the difference between standards and wish lists, and just what we feel like the church has done throughout our time growing up in church, and just the disservice that it's created for dating culture, and what we hope to see from the church moving forward.
So today we'll be talking about church and relationships. Francis, Iris, and myself have all grown up in church, and we feel like it's very strongly shaped how we view relationships and also just shaped how we approach relationships. So just right off the bat, was there anything that really stood out in your time from growing up in church when it came to dating and love interests?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I think church definitely has a way of talking about romantic relationships and dating especially. I think in my own experience, it's almost like a very directed way of talking about it, and we don't really venture into like outside questions necessarily about like this topic. It's just very like, this is the holy way of how you should date or how you should meet people, that you get married, and then like we just kind of end the conversation there. And I think it's always, I think personally, been a struggle, because sometimes you might have other questions and I've never known how to address them. But I think as I've grown older, I'm like, man, like I think everybody had the same questions I did, and we just didn't really know like how to voice them out without being weird at church.
Yeah, like when I was growing up at church, I think dating was just not allowed, you know, and if you even tried to date or like had an interest in somebody, it was actually, I feel like it was condemned by church and like just pastors, etc. And I think this is like a subject that's like really sad to me, because I feel like by doing that, you know, you actually, the people that maybe were dating or exploring relationships, they actually turn away from God. And that's like, I know people like literally from church that like have never come back because of that.
Wow.
And also I think, you know, kind of just saying this is not allowed, and actually it's like the prohibition. It has an adverse effect where it makes people want to explore it more in an unhealthy way than versus if you were just saying, hey, let's talk about it, let's explore it. Maybe they can have a normal like approach to it versus like something that's so like, you know, eccentric about it.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've always wondered is how much of this has to do with us being raised in a Chinese church as well. Because I think what I've seen, let's say my mom, if she hears something from like a friend, then she'll pass on to me as, oh, this person said you have to do this to, let's say, get this job. And then I feel like they kind of just took that and did it with dating and relationships too. And it just somehow spread to every Chinese church that I know, where it's like, oh, hey, you can't date before this age. Once you date, it has to be for marriage, and then you're good. But it's just weird because it's always an on and off switch, and it's a clear, or they try to make it where it's one size fits all, but obviously that's so not true.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring up an excellent point in that I think being Asian or Chinese, or like, you know, maybe just in the in the Asian community, we're very communal, and I think everybody's actions kind of affects everybody's actions. So I think there's an added layer on top of just growing up in church and the church dating culture, that like Chinese church dating culture is even more intense in a way, because there's like, okay, well, if our two kids are dating, there's this like, it's kind of like your kids' actions affect my kids' actions, and you know, and there's like this weird expectation thing that starts coming in, so it makes it even more complicated. So yeah, I think there definitely is an added layer when you add in like the Chinese church part of it to this whole culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like so much judgment surrounding it. And also just maybe in Chinese culture, you know, it's all about image, you know? And so like if it affects like a certain image or like how they want their family to be portrayed, then yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So what were some, I guess, big things relationship-wise while you were growing up that you feel like it didn't resonate with you too much, or you saw a lot of pushback, whether it's through yourself or through peers?
I mean, I think kind of what Francis was talking about earlier is just like, I think the image thing is very important, you know, so like maybe if your parents are like, you know, pretty high leaders in the church or they serve a lot, then it kind of affects like how I was able to like, who I was kind of able to be interested in, who I wasn't able to be interested in. And, you know, I think also like as a, you know, like I grew up in youth group and I was a leader, and so there are certain expectations where you're like, if you're a leader, like I don't know if this is something in your experiences, but like if you're a leader, like it's almost like you couldn't date because you are like, you're on a pedestal, you're on some sort of leadership platform, and so everybody's watching what you're doing, and if you're dating somebody and it doesn't go well, or it doesn't work out, then that's like almost unholy, you know, that you tried that.
Yeah, I mean, I think dating was definitely perceived as unhealthy and a sin, you know, and so it's like you can't even do it, otherwise you need to repent.
Yeah, it also is like, oh, it's a waste of time. Like, go focus on your studies, go play more instruments for worship team. But yeah, for some reason, just there was never too much priority placed on it. The conversation about it, I don't think it ever really comes up. It's always just a strict no, and there's no exploration of why it's a no. And I don't know if it's because maybe our elders or like our parents at that time, they just didn't think we could comprehend that sort of conversation. But I do think it just left a lot of damage, because you naturally, for me, I'm like, oh, dating's no good, well, I'm gonna go try to date.
Exactly. I really do feel like that when they do that, it really makes people actually choose to. Dating's not wrong, obviously, but then the choices afterwards that you make, like you may not even have made those if it wasn't such a taboo to even try and date, you know.
So it's actually funny because I feel like I was actually opposite of you, because you're like, I like was the one that rebelled and was like, I'm just gonna do it. But I was like, I'm like the goody two shoes where I'm like, okay, I'll never date. Like I'm never gonna even cross the line of like talking to a boy at church, you know? Yeah. And like I kind of think about it now, and I'm like, how did this culture even come to be? Because I don't think necessarily we ever had like a sermon or necessarily a leader be like, no to dating, you know? Not that I remember, but like for some reason it was like a very understood like rule / like message that was like kind of like portrayed. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, like where does that come from? And like I don't think necessarily maybe even setting like maybe from like the leadership and like setting boundaries is a bad idea, but where did it get so like polar onto one end where it was like just no?
I mean, I think there's this like bigger extent in the church where like as long as there's one bad example, then people try everything they can in their power to not let that happen again. So like if there was one bad dating experience for, let's say, kids in middle school, high school, then it's like, okay, that was bad. We don't want to repeat that. We need to, like, you know, as Asians, save face and watch our image. So from now on, to be safe, no dating. And then, yeah, I think an indirect consequence of that is that, okay, well, if someone does date, they're scared to talk to anyone that's more mature than them about it, because like, oh, I can't share that I'm doing this taboo thing, even though it's clearly taking up so much of my mental and emotional space.
Right. It's almost like there's a shame culture associated with dating,
for sure.
essentially.
Yeah. And then I also think it debilitates like the actual the socialness of just people in general, because then all of a sudden you're creating like a culture and a group of people who feel like they can't talk to the opposite sex, otherwise they're like committing a sin. So that everybody
that was fully me.
So that everybody at church ends up being very awkward about like these situations, when really this is just human nature to be attracted to people and want to be close to somebody.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember like in youth group where, you know, like, oh, Sam's sitting next to like so and so, and it's just like, we're just friends, like. But it's a big deal because I think just of the culture that's set. But I think it's also just interesting because it's almost like whoever, right? Like we don't know exactly where this train of thought or culture came from, but it's almost like whoever put that there was expecting that, oh, once you pass this certain threshold, whether it's like age or like a maturity level, everything's okay and it works. But like that's not how people grow and
Yeah.
live their life. You can't just turn on a switch.
Yeah, which I think there's like so many memes out there about like how like Asian kids just like grow up and then like past a certain age it's like, why are you not married yet? But prior to that you can't talk to any single person from the opposite gender. And I feel like that is like the added layer that's into this, and now it's on top of that, it's just like talking to like people at church who are supposed to be your community, and now you're like, I straight up don't even know how to talk to the opposite gender. And now I'm supposed to get married all of a sudden and have children.
Yeah, I mean, I know for Esther, like she mentioned that when she was younger, her mom like introduced to this book to their family because she heard it from probably another auntie or something. It was like I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like that ushered in probably a lot of this, where it's like, I think obviously it was intended for good.
Right.
We don't even really need to talk about what happened to the author down the road, but just like the contents of the book. Like it was meant for good, but then there was all these adverse effects that I think because, once again, the parents were thinking, oh, it's a one-size-fits-all, then because this feels good to me and looks good to me on paper, then it'll naturally apply to everyone that is reading it. And then I think even through this, right, like that's where like purity culture came up and like courtship, but then the underside of that is there is a whole shame culture that is associated with purity culture.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but purity culture was really big when I was growing up. And I remember promise rings and purity rings. And I mean, I always think this story is so funny, but I remember getting a purity ring, and it was kind of a big deal, you know, like you have to choose. And I think they even had like different selections for you to choose from, like your style of ring that you wanted. And it was like a really big deal. I think I was like in junior high at the time. Like, this is like my first like piece of jewelry, you know? That was like my purity ring. And I got my purity ring and I lost it within 2 days. And I'm like, thinking to myself, oh boy, I am not pure no more. You know, like I lost my purity ring. I don't even know where it went. That's like my purity journey.
And that's probably what it is, right? They created a standard that is actually, I'm not going to say it's like not attainable or not human, but they just created the standard. And like once you fell short of that, then you just become the villain of the whole situation. And I think it's so unhealthy. Like, I don't really know exactly what that book was about, even though I also grew up on that book. I didn't read it. And this is why I don't know I didn't go through the promise ring phase, but I think that it's not quite healthy, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that also leads to where nowadays we have friends, maybe not seriously asking, but it is a thought that they ask, like, oh, so does that mean I don't even need to date, and then I can just straight up get married?
Let me tell you, dating is so important, you know, because it's through dating that you actually figure out like what you're compatible with, what you need from a relationship, what you can bring, and you find out so much more about yourself.
Totally.
How would you even like be able to be married to somebody if you don't even know what's out there in terms of compatibility and what's out there in terms of a partner?
Yeah.
It honestly does not make any sense. And I'm going to go even one step further. The people that I know that have done that and gone that course, sure, they're success stories. But guess what? There's also an abundance of stories of divorces, affairs, etc. Because they had no idea what they were doing when they were getting into it. They didn't know who they were. They didn't know who their partner was. They didn't know what they needed in a relationship. And that's what happens.
Totally, yeah. And like dating, like you said, it's important because you need to learn about, like sometimes you think you know what your values are or what's important to you, but until you actually are in the relationship, going through the conflicts, going through the struggles, going through the fights, going through the situations where you're like, why am I feeling like this? Do you understand what really are your values or your priorities? And if you never go through that, it's really hard to, and you go through and you just jump into marriage, and you're going to have to figure that out in marriage, and that's not easy necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then, right, I think Francis brought up a good point where people just took all these exceptions and thought that was the rule. But, right, in reality, those were the exceptions. And I just think, again, I feel like it's just so hard to process now, I think, like, as I've aged, where, like, why did people think this made sense to, like, tell us, hey, everything about dating and, like, interacting with the opposite gender is bad. But then, oh, are you married? Do you have kids? Like, wait, what? There's so many steps in between these stages that we just don't explore in church anymore. And I think, yeah, it's just so weird.
Yeah.
I think they probably did that because they, just like you said earlier, they probably think of the worst case scenario, right? Like, to Asian parents probably a child out of wedlock, right? And then so they want to prevent that as much as possible to the point where they're like, just don't date, which is like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder, like, I'm not too in touch with, like, high schoolers in church now, but I do wonder if, like, that culture is still, emanating. And if so, like, what are things we can do about it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't even know if I have the answer to that necessarily, but I mean, I think there's always the conflict between, where do we set healthy boundaries for people, and then at the same time, like, where have we like gone too much and crossing the line? And I think that's something that, like, even just growing up, like, I know we've kind of talked about how this has been damaging, but maybe at the time in their perspective, this was like the best thing they could do for us, and setting these really strict boundaries. But we always learn in retrospect that was probably not the healthiest thing. And so I think sometimes now I even wonder, like, for our future kids, and our future generations, like, where is the healthy boundary to draw? Because you want to encourage this healthy boundary and, culture, but at the same time, also like not being like too like free about something where people just go like there's no values and no nothing, no rules anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I'm not a parent, so I don't know how to, like, I wouldn't know how to address it per se, but I do think that, like, probably step one is just to begin talking about dating and just to normalize it. Like, hey, dating is not bad. It's okay. Yeah. It's okay if you like somebody, and it's okay if they like you back. Yeah. But I think it's maybe more the education afterwards about, like, what you do with that, and what a healthy, maybe it's about what does a healthy relationship look like in dating. Yeah. Not just like, oh, it's bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and actually that kind of reminds me of a situation in college where I remember going on a college retreat, and that was the very first time where they had like a panel of different couples, and they actually talked about their relationships while they were dating and like in marriage, and I felt like the way they shared was just so open and honest, and I was like, man, in a church setting, this is the first time I've actually heard people openly talk about, like what a real life, like, let's not even say Christian, a real life dating or marriage relationship looks like. And I'm like, man, I've grown up at church. Like, how come this is my first time in college listening to like people talk about this? And I think it's like, it's so important for us, like maybe even in the future generations and like how we kind of do church from now on, is to talk about these things, because these are real life human like struggles that every single person experiences, whether you are Christian or not.
Yeah. And I think it's so important, because I guess what gets to me so much about this particular topic about like purity and everything is that, like, what happens to the people that could not do the promise ring, that could not follow through with 100% purity, right? What happens to them? They automatically get categorized in this like shame, like sinner, like box.
Like the bad group.
The bad group. And I hate that, because do you even know like how detrimental that like narrative that you're telling them is? And was it really that like so bad? Like I think just my heart goes out to that, because maybe like I was one of those people that were like, oh, she's a bad kid. But I'm like, I'm not bad. And I think, if it wasn't for the fact that I am in a very strong Christian household, like, I don't know that, I think at the time I was like, I don't want God. If this is like what God's like, I don't want to be a part of this. Yeah. And I feel like it took me so long to get back to like the church and everything, but I feel like, what about the people that don't have that support system to like try and get them back?
Right. And that's just not who Jesus is. Jesus is all about, like redeeming us and coming to like, restore us, and that's not the message of Jesus, which makes me sad too, that like that's kind of the angle that we kind of went awry in, and that shaming of like, if you sin, you messed up, that's it for you, but I feel like you are a success story that you came back, but like
I'm the prodigal daughter.
But you made it.
I made it. Jeez.
Yeah. See, it's another case that I feel like maybe down the road some parents would use your story and be like, oh, Francis was the rule, so we can set these like really restrictive boundaries and it'll work out because they'll turn out like Francis. But it's not true. And I wonder, like, I don't know, like, back to, I think, the bridge of like Christian and a Chinese/Asian household. I wonder if there was an aspect of it where like our parents aren't willing to have these like, I guess, semi-awkward conversations with us, because maybe it's just too real when it comes to emotions and, oh, hey dad, I have this crush on like this girl, and it's like, huh? Like that's not a conversation I would ever bring up to my dad. But I think like I've noticed, at least in some of my other my friends who are from other ethnic groups, like at least when I was young, like they would openly talk to their parents at a much more peer level. It's like these topics would come up, maybe not super regularly, but definitely more than in my experience.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big part of it is like maybe, just Asian parents in general are just not very, like, they don't know how to express themselves and don't even know how to talk about it. I think maybe sometimes they were not even talked about it with their parents. And so this is just like completely like random thing for them to know how to talk about, never been educated in knowing how to talk about it. So yeah, I think it's like they're just uncomfortable talking about this topic, and so then it makes us uncomfortable about talking about this topic. But I agree, I think it's very important to talk about it because this is a very real part of life.
Yeah, because it seemed like the solution to talk about it was to substitute with books. It's like, oh, hey, read this. It'll be helpful. Or like, read this. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. So I guess if we were to talk to the future generation or whatever, like how would we tell them that they're ready to date? Or like what are things we look for maybe in ourselves to figure out that, hey, maybe it's time to start dating, give it a shot?
I think going into any like healthy relationship, I think knowing and being happy with yourself is really important, because I think when you're not happy with yourself, you end up trying to either change the other person to making you happy. And I think that's just like number one, like fail of a relationship, because you're both supposed to try to like give to the other person, right? For any strong relationship. So the moment you're trying to take from somebody to make yourself happy is already like, you're not setting yourself up for success. So I think, when you're ready to start dating, when you feel like, you know what, like I am like happy, I'm a happy person, I'm content, and I feel like I can give to somebody. I feel like I can contribute to their life and not having to constantly be like, how does this person make me happy, or what can I take from this person to fulfill my own life?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Like the question of like how and when do you know you're ready to date? I don't know that anybody ever really knows that, because
true.
It's also like who do you come across. But I can say that like I think why you date somebody is like really important. Like I think going along with what you're saying, like there's a saying in love anyways that like you have to be a whole person to be able to love somebody. So if you're like seeking love and wholeness, and you're trying to get that from dating in a relationship, you are gonna fail. Because how can you love somebody if like you're not whole? You can't expect somebody else to give that to you.
Totally.
So I think maybe just figuring out like maybe the psyche behind why you want to date is important.
Yeah, like you always hear in church the whole, oh, you got to give from overflow aspect. I think like, it totally applies here. But then I think right back to the psyche and the reasoning or the why behind it also plays a huge part too, because I feel like when, at least in my case, maybe if I was like trying to date because I just felt like, oh, I need to date or be in a relationship, then those tend to not work out. And it's just like, whether it's, I don't know, desperation comes off or like different, just, I don't know, maybe there's a specific smell of what desperation is. And it's just like, no, this person's not ready. He's just looking for whatever. Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah. I think also just like bring it back to really basics, like, talking to your friends about it, this is somebody I like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think like, this would work out? Sometimes I think just asking like your close, I think there's always a caveat, like don't ask everybody about it, but like your close friends, or if you're close to your family, like, what do you guys think? Like, do you think I'm ready to date? I think if you genuinely want to ask that question, they will genuinely give you a good answer because they have a different perspective on you. I think also, like, if you're ready to date, like, maybe do you like this person? Like, let's just be very basic. Like, if you really like this person and you think about things that, like, I really see that we have a lot of compatibility. I think those are things you should think about that then,
Yeah, I do wonder, I think, right, like, maybe the question is too formulaic, where it's not always about if you're ready, because, right, sometimes if someone special comes into your life and you're like, I think this could work. Right. And then maybe you're not, I don't think we really gave that many check boxes about, oh, this makes you ready, but maybe you haven't checked off those boxes if there were hypothetical boxes, but your emotions and your heart just tells you what it wants.
Yeah, I mean, I think connection at the end of the day is like the most important in dating. Like, don't date just to date because you're going to get yourself in so much trouble. You're actually going to regress in like your confidence in yourself because when you're just dating for whatever, it does chip away and take parts of your heart, even if you think it's like not serious.
Yeah.
It does. It affects your confidence and everything. So don't date just to date. I think just really look for human connection, whatever that is, right? Whether it's like real, just like chemistry off the bat, whether it's like shared interest and that usually leads to something beyond. But I think always seek connection first and foremost.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like when you guys like started dating, in any dating situation that you guys may have been in, or with your your now husband and wife, like what did you guys like look for? I guess when people say like or standards or the qualifications, like what were some of those things that you guys like had? Did you have a list?
I mean, I kind of had a list. I think I had a much more thorough list like earlier on. And then by the time I met Esther, my list was just, let me see, it was like the like classic quote unquote hot and holy. But just like, so I made it basically like, oh, this person needed to have a walk with God and not just I just go to church and small groups type of walk, but like, on fire, her own walk. And then another one was like the hot aspect was, oh, I need to do a triple take. So it wasn't enough to just do a double take when I met her, but it's like a triple take as well. And then on a more practical level, it was, oh, this person needs to speak Mandarin because, right, just from, if there is any future, then I would like my significant other to be able to talk to my parents. And if that doesn't work, then it's just tough. Because I think, with my college girlfriend, she could understand Mandarin, but she couldn't speak it. So I think because I was able to date her and like see the difficulties that came from, it wasn't even too difficult, but there was clearly a communication gap when she would talk to my family because they would talk to her in Chinese and she would reply back in English, and maybe sometimes there's stuff lost in translation, so I'm translating. I'm like, well, then they'll never be able to truly have their own relationship if I need to be the constant communicator. Yeah, but then while we're on that topic, I think it's also like when I met my ex, it was just someone popped up. There were no values. It was just like, oh, mutual interests. We're like both in the same major at college, and like this girl talks to me. Like, okay, cool. Yeah. What about you, Francis?
I don't think I had a checklist per se. I'm about to overshare right now. I did not have a checklist in terms of like, oh, they gotta, I don't know. Some people have really crazy checklists. They have to be like this tall. They have to look this way, have these interests, like go to this school. Like I didn't have that, but I did know like the persona that I thought that like I would want, like I wanted somebody that was an alpha male because I'm an alpha female. So I actually thought that if I get an alpha male that we can match our energies and like just rule the world, okay? Or I wanted somebody that like was well-traveled, etc. So I wanted like those kinds of qualities. But what I realized was I think that in the midst of it, like, and I didn't even realize it until I met my guy now, but basically I was chasing after the same kind of guy and just dating them over and over again and getting nowhere. And it wasn't until I met Adam, and I told him, I said, hey, off the bat, like straight up, you are not my type. Like in terms of looks, personality, your drive, your career, like there's nothing about you that is on my, target persona. And because of that, I think like he pursued me so hard, but we started out as friends, but it gave me an opportunity to like really know him as a person. And I think once I like really, started getting to know him, he asked me, he was like, hey, did you ever realize that maybe what you're looking for is not what you actually need? He was like, you keep looking for alpha male persona, but maybe that's not the best fit for you. And when he said that, I was like, that is so true. Like I keep dating the same person. And so I think that was kind of like a segue for me to date him. And it's not that I compromise, because a lot of people think, oh, if it's not these things, these certain things, you're compromising. It's not that, because those are all just checklist items. My standards never changed. He like treats me so well, so much respect, and that never changes, right? So sometimes I think I had to learn just from like him just like being point blank to me about it, but like I think that if you hold on so much to like what you think you need, sometimes it's like you don't even know what you need. Totally. And that's like that was my story. I had no idea.
Oh, that's such a good point, because I feel like there's so many people that I know, they literally have a black and white list of like these are the standards, and if people don't meet these standards, I'm compromising myself, and I feel like very similar situation where like my husband now, Daniel, was like, not my ideal type, you know, in any single way, shape, or form. But like what I realized that the most important thing, I think at the end of the day, that I didn't even know was important to me were just like the internal values and the chemistry that we kind of talked about earlier was actually really important to me, but I didn't know those things were important to me. So for me, like I'm more of an intuitive person, so I never really had a black and white list, but there's like an image of what you think you want, right? And like I think I realized like that just went out the door when we started dating, and like when I started to get to know him, because I was like, I don't think that, like, I like you, but you're not any of these things, and like you just don't know.
But I feel like, right, you both mentioned standards, and I feel like sometimes people get it confused. Like a checklist versus a standard is different, right? Like being a certain height isn't a standard. That's like a want, a nice to have.
It's a wish list.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, a wish list. So it's I just get confused when I see people's lists and they're like, oh, these, you know, certain physical traits that need to be there. I'm like, I don't know, man. That seems kind of sketch.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work like that. And I think, right, these are all great stories where standards should be deeper. It should have much more meaning to it. Because that I think when we get too caught up in the wish list of like physical traits, then no one tries to date because they just think they're only looking at the outside. I don't think people even consider too much like mutual interest at that point, or do we share hobbies and different things like that, and they just get stuck in this. And I just remember for a while, like people would bring this up, like, oh, I just can't find anyone to date, and like I just think more or less people they didn't say it out loud, but they were basically saying that they felt they were better than you know the population around. And then in my head, I'm just like, dude, you're like looking for a 10, but really like you're a 5. Like, you gotta like
reality
you gotta be looking for a 5. Like I don't get why these people who are 5s keep telling me they want a 10. Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times, like that wish list and what people want is actually like their internal projection of what a perfect person is.
Yeah.
But guess what? Like a perfect person doesn't exist.
I know.
You know? So you only have to find the perfect that is like nobody's perfect, but the perfect, like imperfect person for you.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's like a disconnect that I think for me, it took years to learn that there's no perfect person.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think actually now that like being on the other side of like not dating but marriage, you realize what really matters in terms of like what I should look for in a spouse. And I think like that did not hit me as hard until after I got married. And I'm like, man, if I went with like what I thought I wanted, like in high school or college even, like I don't think we would be in a successful marriage at this point, you know? And like I realized like there's certain traits that like, you know, that will take you far in marriage if this person has this type of character or quality or value system that like, you know, that you just like don't realize until you're on the other side. And I am thankful to my parents in this way, in that I think they like really highlighted these things to me. Like, you know, like the physical stuff is one thing and the outer stuff is one thing, but like really what matters to make a marriage last, because dating is really only an X amount of years in your entire lifespan. You're going to be married way longer than hopefully than when you're dating, right? So. Yeah, I hope so, right? And so, you know, like those are the things that really I feel like we should be talking about more, is like what are the values or the standards, you know, that we say that we want to look for in a future spouse or a husband or wife that like we should be focusing on, instead of what do we want to look for when we're dating.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, right, bringing this back to the topic we started off with church, it's almost like the dating topic stops after people get married. And then they don't talk about kind of the growth and the struggles that we go through like once we are married. And I just think, right, again, I think our church is doing a disservice, or like the church as a whole is doing a disservice to people, because they just get these propped up ideas of, oh, as long as we dated well, marriage will be easy and we're good. It's like, oh man, you are in for a rude awakening.
Nothing is further from the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why, like, it, you know, it's so hard to talk about certain topics at church, where we really should have the freedom to talk about it, because it really does, like, make everybody better as a community. Yeah,
I do think, I don't know, if I were able to, I guess, quote unquote, change youth group curriculum or like dating culture, I think, yeah, just different things we mentioned, like what are good standards that we think our kids should embody, and then also therefore look for in people that they are interested in pursuing, right? Like I think a big one is are you both willing to grow? Like, are you, like, yes, content I think is important, but it's also like, you can't just be satisfied with where you are. Like, people should be trying to get better, but I don't know if that's a standard that like people don't look for or like don't know to look for. Like, do you guys have anything you would want to add to that list?
I mean, I think it would just be good to have like a culture where we are encouraged to share our real thoughts and our struggles, you know, our questions, you know, like, you know, where like maybe we all don't even know the answer to it, but maybe we all know that we're all trying to figure this out. And like, I think, you know, maybe even in any type of like parenting relationship, like I think if you can foster a culture where people are not scared to share their real thoughts and they feel safe that they can express even a quote unquote dumb question, I think that would eliminate a lot of like potential problems, because, you know, I think at the end of the day, everyone's trying to do the right thing. Everyone wants to go in the right direction and have a healthy dating relationship and find the right person and marry the right person. But we just are all kind of like, don't know how to get there and also too scared to know how to ask those questions sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a big takeaway is just we just can't have churches where the culture is to make certain things taboo.
Yeah.
And I don't think our parents or whoever started it meant it to be this way, but at least my experience was dating is very much a taboo topic. And so that's why we get to sit here now and you know, chat about it, and there's kind of gripes, but yeah, hopefully things get better. Anything else either of you would like to add?
Yeah, I think just more discussion on it overall, and just ultimately at the end of the day, love, acceptance, and compassion. You know, there is no right and wrong. This is life. There is no like right or wrong way, you know, but it's just every step of the way. Like, I feel like as a church, like no matter what somebody's been through, it's our job to like lift them up, you know, encourage them and fortify them, you know, no matter what it is that was wrong. You know, and so I think that's what we need to do as a church.
Yeah, and as a community, we are here to like lift each other up, like you said. You know, we are here to support one another, and like even now being married, you know, like we are here to like talk about the hardships of marriage, to go through the journey of marriage together. We're not better, not one couple is better than the other. We're all going to struggle in our own ways, but let's share about it and let's, you know, like talk and pray over it and like lift each other up so that we all can be successful in our relationships.
Yeah, I think this is all good stuff, and let's just hope we can change for the better, church can change for the better, and that we all just grow and learn to accept each other more and take each other for where they've been, and hopefully we all go in the same direction.
Yeah.